My name is Megan, and this is the story of how my mom paid $15,000 for my younger brother's wedding, and how I ended up paying for mine all by myself and didn't even invite her. It sounds harsh, I know. It sounds like something out of a made-up drama, but every single word of it is true. It's the truth of how years of feeling like the less favored child finally reached a breaking point, a point where I had to choose my own peace and my own future over trying to constantly earn a love that felt conditional. It wasn't some sudden blow-up or a single argument that led to me walking down the aisle without my mother in the pews. It was a slow, steady erosion of trust and a growing awareness of the deep-seated favoritism that had always been there, just maybe not so glaringly obvious until major life events started happening. My brother Mark is 4 years younger than me. Growing up, he was the golden child. He was the one who could do no wrong, the one whose accomplishments were always celebrated louder, whose mistakes were always excused easier. I tried not to resent it. I told myself that's just how some parents are, that maybe I was just more independent and needed less fuss. But deep down, it stung. It always stung. The wedding saga really kicked off about 3 years ago. Mark had been dating Sarah for a couple of years, and they were a sweet couple. Nobody was really surprised when they got engaged. It was exciting. Our family isn't huge, just me, Mark, and our parents. My dad is pretty quiet, mostly just goes along with whatever my mom wants. So, her opinions and decisions usually carried the most weight. As soon as Mark and Sarah announced their engagement, my mom went into full wedding planning mode. And not just, "Oh, this is fun" mode. It was, "I am taking over every detail, and also I am paying for it" mode. It happened so fast. Within weeks, she had booked a venue, chosen caterers, picked out florists. Sarah seemed a little overwhelmed but happy that so much was being handled. Mark just kind of shrugged and let my mom take the reins. I remember sitting at their place one evening, maybe a month or two after the engagement, and my mom was just rattling off numbers. The venue deposit was $5,000. The caterer wants half up front, that's another $3,000. The dress budget is set at $2,500. My jaw was practically on the floor. I knew weddings were expensive, but hearing her casually talk about dropping thousands and thousands of dollars like it was pocket change was shocking. Especially because money had always been a little tight when I was growing up. We weren't poor, but big, lavish expenses weren't our thing. Vacations were road trips, not flights. New cars were rare. So this level of spending felt completely out of character. I asked her about it later, when we were alone. I tried to be casual, like, "Wow, Mom, that's so generous of you to pay for all of this." And she just brushed it off, saying something like, "Oh, well, it's my only son's wedding. Of course, I want it to be perfect. And weddings these days are just so expensive, aren't they? They'll need that money for a down payment on a house." That last part stuck with me. They'll need that money for a down payment on a house. It was like the wedding wasn't just a gift. It was an investment in Mark's future, a way to make sure he and Sarah started off on solid ground. It felt incredibly unfair. Not that Mark didn't deserve help, but it highlighted the complete lack of similar conversations about my future, about my needs. I was still single at the time, working hard, saving what I could, just trying to get by in a really expensive city. The idea of getting help like that felt like a fantasy. As the planning for Mark's wedding continued, the spending didn't stop. There was a lavish engagement party my mom insisted on hosting and paying for. There were multiple bridal showers, a huge rehearsal dinner. By the time the wedding day rolled around, I had a pretty good idea of the total cost, just from overhearing conversations and seeing receipts scattered around their house. It was easily $15,000, maybe more. A significant amount of money for our family. The wedding itself was beautiful. Sarah was a stunning bride, and Mark was beaming. Everyone had a great time. My mom was in her element, playing the proud, generous mother of the groom, accepting compliments on how wonderfully she'd pulled it all together. And she had pulled it all together because she had funded the vast majority of it. Watching it all, I felt a complex mix of happiness for my brother and Sarah, and a deep, aching sadness for myself. It wasn't just about the money, though $15,000 is a lot of money. It was about what the money represented. It represented my mother's priorities, her willingness to go above and beyond for one child in a way she never had for the other. It felt like a public declaration of who mattered more. I tried to push the feeling down. I told myself I was being petty, that I should just be happy for them. But the feeling lingered, a knot in my stomach. Every time someone complimented my mom on the wedding, every time I saw Mark and Sarah enjoying something she had paid for, the knot tightened. Around this time, I had started getting serious with my now husband, Daniel. We had been together for about 1.5 years, and we were talking about the future, about getting married, about buying a place together. The contrast between my brother's fully funded wedding and the reality of how Daniel and I would have to scrape and save for everything hit me hard. We were both working decent jobs, but we had student loans, rent, all the usual expenses. A wedding felt like a huge financial hurdle. I remember one conversation with my mom shortly after Mark's wedding. I was talking about how Daniel and I were thinking about saving for a down payment on a condo, and how daunting it felt. I mentioned, half joking, half hoping, maybe you guys could help out a little when the time comes? And she just laughed. Not a mean laugh, but a dismissive one. Oh, honey, we just spent a fortune on Mark's wedding. We don't have money like that lying around. The air went cold. I wasn't asking for $15,000 for a down payment, but the complete lack of even a token offer or acknowledging that she had just poured a massive amount into my brother's life event while offering nothing for mine was a punch to the gut. It confirmed everything I had suspected. Mark was the priority. His milestones were worth significant investment. Mine were, well, mine to figure out. That conversation was a turning point. It solidified the feeling that I was on my own, that I couldn't expect the same level of support or enthusiasm that my brother received so freely. It hurt more than I can say. It made me question my place in the family, my worth in my mother's eyes. It made me wonder if she even saw me as having equally important life events. Thinking back on all of it, the years of subtle differences, the glaring contrast of the wedding funding, and that final dismissive comment, it built up into a wall. A wall between me and the expectation of having a traditional family wedding experience. It forced me to look at things realistically and make some tough decisions about what I wanted my own wedding to be, and who I wanted there to celebrate with me. It might sound extreme, but sometimes, when you feel like you've been overlooked and undervalued for so long, you have to take drastic steps to protect your own emotional well-being. What would you have done in my situation? Let me know below. It felt like I was standing at a crossroads, and every path forward involved acknowledging this painful truth about my family dynamic. I knew, even then, that my own wedding planning was going to look very different from Mark's, and that difference wasn't just about budget. It was about who was showing up for me. So yeah, it wasn't just about the money, although believe me, $15,000 versus $0 is a pretty stark contrast. It was about feeling seen. Or rather, feeling unseen. After Mark's wedding and seeing the sheer scale of my mother's investment, both financially and emotionally, it hit me hard. It wasn't just a one-off thing, it was a pattern. My brother was the golden child, the one whose milestones were celebrated with fanfare and significant resources. My life events, well, they were less prioritized. My partner, Chris, was amazing through all of this. He saw it too, the way my family operated. He didn't have a complicated family dynamic like mine. His was pretty straightforward, loving, supportive. He couldn't fully grasp the depth of the subtle slights over the years, but he saw the pain it caused me, especially after the wedding funding conversation, or lack thereof. We were engaged, and the initial excitement of planning our own wedding was immediately overshadowed by this giant, unspoken issue. How were we going to do this? And who were we going to invite? We talked for hours. About money, obviously. We were both working, but we weren't rolling in cash. We were saving for a down payment on a modest house, trying to build a future. A big, traditional wedding like Mark's was simply out of the question for us, even if we had wanted one, which, honestly, we didn't. The idea of a massive performative event felt wrong somehow after everything. We wanted something intimate, something that felt like us. But beyond the budget, there was the emotional cost. Could I even imagine walking down an aisle with my mother sitting in the front row, knowing she'd poured so much into my brother's day and nothing into mine? Knowing that her presence might feel less like a celebration of me and Chris, and more like an obligation, or worse, a subtle reminder of the disparity? It felt like trying to build something beautiful on shaky ground. The thought of planning a wedding without my mother's involvement, without her financial support, and potentially without her presence, was incredibly painful. It wasn't a decision I took lightly. There's this societal expectation, right? That your mother is supposed to be there, helping you pick out your dress, planning the shower, being excited about your big day. It's in all the movies, all the magazines. And grieving the loss of that idealized version of a mother-daughter wedding experience was a process in itself. I remember sitting with Chris one evening, going through hypothetical guest lists. We'd talk about our friends, his family, my dad, who, bless him, was always kind but less involved in the family drama. And then we'd get to my mom and her side of the family. My stomach would just knot up. Chris would gently ask, "What are you thinking?" And I'd just shake my head, unable to articulate the tangle of hurt, resentment, and sadness. We started looking at venues that were more affordable, small restaurants, botanical gardens, even thinking about just eloping and having a big party later. Every time we pictured a traditional setting, I'd picture my mother, and the image was just fraught. It wasn't happy, it wasn't celebratory, it felt heavy. We decided to be completely self-sufficient. Every dollar spent on our wedding would be a dollar we had earned and saved ourselves. This felt important. It wasn't just about necessity, it was about reclaiming agency. This was our day, built by us, for us. We weren't relying on anyone, and in that, there was a strange sense of freedom. We wouldn't owe anyone anything. We wouldn't have to compromise our vision to appease a benefactor. We budgeted meticulously. Every line item was scrutinized. We prioritized the things that mattered most to us: good food, a great photographer to capture the memories, and a comfortable space for the people we truly wanted to share the day with. The guest list became the biggest hurdle. How do you uninvite your mother to your wedding? It sounds harsh, I know. It felt harsh, but the alternative felt worse. The alternative was inviting someone whose presence felt like a judgment, someone who hadn't shown up for me in the way I needed, especially at this significant juncture in my life. It felt like inviting the very dynamic I was trying to escape. It felt like inviting the reminder that I wasn't worth the investment, not like my brother was. And I didn't want that energy anywhere near the most important commitment I would ever make. I wrestled with it for months. I talked to my few close friends about it. Some were shocked, some were understanding. My dad was heartbroken, but he understood my perspective, or at least he tried to. He knew the history. He knew the strain in my relationship with my mom. He didn't try to convince me otherwise, which I appreciated. He just offered his support, whatever I decided. The decision crystallized slowly, painfully. It wasn't a sudden outburst of anger. It was a quiet, firm realization that inviting her would compromise the very essence of what we wanted our wedding to be. A genuine, joyful celebration of our love, surrounded only by people who unequivocally supported us and made us feel loved and valued. Her presence, unfortunately, would introduce a layer of complexity, a history of hurt that I simply couldn't bear on that day. It felt like an act of self-preservation. I had to protect my peace. I had to prioritize my own emotional well-being and the sanctity of the commitment Chris and I were making. And that meant making a choice that went against every traditional expectation, a choice that I knew would have significant consequences for my relationship with my mother and potentially the rest of my family. But it felt like the necessary, albeit painful, step forward. It was time to build my own foundation, on my own terms. Making that decision, it was like a physical weight lifted, but also like stepping off a cliff. It felt right, deep down in my gut, but it was terrifying. The immediate aftermath wasn't some grand moment of liberation. It was just quiet, a heavy quiet. I sat with it for a while, letting the reality sink in. This was happening. I was going to get married, and my mother wouldn't be there. The next step was telling Chris officially. He knew I was wrestling with it, but I hadn't said the final words yet. I remember we were just sitting on the couch after dinner. I took a deep breath and just told him. "I've made my decision," I said. "I'm not inviting her." He didn't react with shock or judgment. He just nodded, reached for my hand and squeezed it. "Okay," he said quietly. "Whatever you need. We'll do this together." His calm support meant everything in that moment. It solidified that this wasn't just my decision affecting my family, but a decision we were making as a couple, navigating the consequences together. Then came the practical part, planning a wedding, without a mother figure involved in the traditional sense. No excited calls about dress shopping, no joint Pinterest boards, none of the things you see in movies or hear about from friends. It was just Chris and me figuring things out. And the biggest figuring out was the money. The title of this story mentions my mom paying for my brother's wedding. That's not an exaggeration. She wrote a check for $15,000, just like that, for his wedding. He and his wife had a lovely wedding, nothing over the top, but certainly not cheap. My mom handled a significant chunk of the cost. It was presented, as most things were, as just what you do, what parents do. When it came to my wedding, there was never even a conversation about her contributing. Not a hint. And honestly, after making the decision not to invite her, I wouldn't have accepted it anyway. But even before that, the expectation wasn't there. It just wasn't part of our dynamic. So the entire financial burden fell on me and Chris. We sat down and looked at our savings. We set a budget, a strict one. This wasn't a fairy tale wedding fund handed down. This was money we had earned, saved, dollar by hard-earned dollar. Every decision about a vendor, every choice about flowers or music or food was weighed against that budget. There was no safety net, no fallback. It was all on us. It was stressful, no doubt about it. Trying to find a venue that wasn't exorbitant, photographers who fit our budget but still captured the moments, a caterer who could feed our guests without breaking the bank. Every detail felt magnified because the financial responsibility was entirely ours. There were moments of panic, thinking we couldn't afford the things we wanted, moments of compromise, choosing practicality over Pinterest-perfect aesthetics. But there was also a strange sense of empowerment in it. This wedding, every single piece of it, was ours. We weren't beholden to anyone else's expectations or financial contributions. We were building it from the ground up, together. It felt authentic to us, a reflection of our values and our partnership. It wasn't about putting on a show. It was about celebrating our commitment in a way that felt genuine and sustainable for our future. Planning without my mother's involvement also meant navigating a unique emotional landscape. There was relief, absolutely. Relief from the potential for conflict, for criticism, for the underlying tension that her presence often brought. I didn't have to worry about her disapproving of my dress choice, or the venue, or the guest list. I didn't have to brace myself for passive-aggressive comments about my decisions. That was a huge weight off my shoulders, but there was also sadness. A deep, quiet ache for the mother-daughter wedding planning experience I would never have, for the shared excitement over finding the perfect shoes, or the teary-eyed moment trying on wedding dresses. Even with our difficult history, there was a part of me that grieved the absence of that traditional maternal role. It felt like another marker of how broken our relationship was, that this significant life event couldn't include her in that way. I remember going dress shopping. I took my maid of honor and a couple of close friends. It was a lovely day, filled with laughter and support, but there was a moment standing on the pedestal, looking in the mirror, that I felt a pang of loneliness. It was a moment you imagined sharing with your mother, and she wasn't there. It wasn't anyone's fault. It was the consequence of the path we were on. But it still hurt. We had to make all the difficult decisions ourselves. Who to invite, who not to invite, besides the obvious. How to handle the seating chart, the flow of the day. There was no one else to defer to, no parental expectations to balance. In some ways, that made it simpler. It was just about what Chris and I wanted, what felt right for us. The financial aspect, though challenging, became intertwined with this sense of independence. Every dollar we spent felt like an investment in our future, a concrete representation of our commitment to building a life together, on our own terms. It wasn't a gift, it was earned, and that gave it a different kind of value. It was ours. We kept the planning relatively quiet, especially from extended family who might report back. It wasn't a secret exactly, but we weren't broadcasting it. The decision not to invite my mother was something I wasn't ready to discuss widely, and the implications of that decision rippled through the planning process. It meant carefully navigating conversations, deciding who needed to know what and when. It added another layer of complexity to an already complex undertaking. But through it all, Chris was there. My partner in navigating the finances, the logistics, and the emotional weight of it all. We were building this wedding and this future together. It felt like the first real step into our independent life as a married couple, funded by us, planned by us, and centered entirely around us. It was scary, yes, but it was also incredibly real and incredibly ours. It was scary, yes, but it was also incredibly real and incredibly ours. And making it ours meant getting down to the nitty-gritty, the spreadsheets, the vendor calls, the sheer, unglamorous work of building a wedding from the ground up with zero outside help. Every decision felt magnified because we knew the cost wasn't abstract. It was coming directly out of our pockets, money we had worked hard for and saved diligently. We weren't planning some grand, opulent affair. That was never the goal, and frankly, it wasn't possible on our budget anyway. We started by setting a realistic number based on our savings and what we felt comfortable spending without going into debt. That number was significantly lower than what I knew my brother's wedding had cost, even before I knew the exact figure. You just knew. There was a difference in scale, a difference in expectation. Theirs was expected to be big, traditional, funded. Ours was whatever we could make it. So, the first step was brutal honesty with ourselves. What were our absolute priorities? For us, it was celebrating with the people who genuinely supported us in a place that felt right. Everything else was secondary. That meant making cuts. Big cuts. The guest list was the hardest part. Every name we added felt like another line item on the budget. We had to be ruthless, focusing only on immediate family, those we did want there, obviously, and our closest friends. It hurt to exclude people, knowing some might be disappointed, but we kept reminding ourselves why we were doing this, for us, within our means. Finding a venue was another lesson in compromise. We looked at traditional wedding halls, and the prices just made our eyes water. We quickly pivoted to less conventional options. A beautiful historic park with a pavilion we could rent, a small independent restaurant with a private event space, even considering a backyard wedding if we could find the right one. We weren't looking for luxury. We were looking for charm, practicality, and affordability. We ended up finding a lovely, slightly rustic event space that felt intimate and allowed us to bring in some of our own vendors, which saved a significant amount of money. It wasn't the ballroom dream some people have, but it felt like us. Casual, warm, focused on the people. Every vendor required research, comparison, and negotiation. We weren't just picking the first florist or photographer we liked. We were getting multiple quotes, asking detailed questions, seeing where we could trim costs without sacrificing quality entirely. Could we do digital invites instead of fancy paper ones? Absolutely. Could we opt for a buffet instead of a plated dinner? Definitely. Could we make our own simple centerpieces instead of elaborate floral arrangements? With a little help from friends, yes. It was a constant process of evaluating wants versus needs and realizing how many traditional wedding must-haves were actually just expensive options we didn't need to feel married or celebrated. There was a certain pride in this DIY approach, though. We weren't just writing checks, we were actively involved in creating the day. Chris was amazing through all of it, diving into the spreadsheets, helping research DJs, tasting cakes, the fun part. It wasn't just my project, it was truly ours. We were a team, tackling this massive project together, just like we planned to tackle life together. The emotional side of not inviting my mother was a constant undercurrent. It wasn't something I talked about openly with everyone involved in the planning. With vendors, it was irrelevant. With friends, I was selective about who I confided in. With extended family, it was a delicate dance. My father and my siblings were supportive, understanding the history and the difficult position I was in. But there were aunts and uncles who, when they heard we were getting married, naturally assumed my mother would be there. Explaining, or often not explaining, why she wouldn't be was awkward. I usually just kept it vague, saying we were keeping the guest list small or focusing on immediate family and close friends. It felt dishonest, but I wasn't ready for the interrogations, the potential judgment, or the pressure to change my mind. The wedding felt fragile enough without adding that layer of conflict into the planning process. Planning a wedding is stressful under any circumstances, but doing it entirely on your own, with a significant emotional complication like excluding a parent, adds a unique kind of pressure. There were days I felt completely overwhelmed, looking at the budget, the endless to-do lists, and the weight of the decision about my mother. There were moments of doubt, wondering if I was doing the right thing, if the peace of mind was worth the potential fallout, if I was being selfish. But then I'd talk to Chris, or look at how far we'd come, the wedding we were building together, piece by piece, and I'd remember why we were doing it this way. This wedding wasn't about fulfilling anyone else's expectations or following tradition just because. It was about celebrating our commitment, surrounded by the people who loved and supported us, authentically and without strings attached. The financial constraints forced us to be incredibly creative and intentional. We learned to prioritize, to negotiate, to appreciate the value of every dollar. It wasn't the effortless check-writing process I imagined some people had. It was a grind, but it was a grind we were doing together. And with every vendor booked, every payment made, every detail sorted, the wedding felt more and more real, more and more ours. It was a testament to our partnership, our ability to work through challenges, and our determination to build our life on our own terms from the very beginning. We were doing it our way, paying our way, and that felt incredibly powerful. It solidified our bond even before we said, "I do." Okay, so we were building this wedding, piece by piece, on our own terms, and feeling really good about that foundation. But let me tell you, doing it that way, paying for everything ourselves, it wasn't just about crunching numbers and finding deals. It was also about navigating expectations, both our own and everyone else's, especially when it came to the guest list. That was probably the first major hurdle that really tested our resolve. When you have a limited budget, your per-person cost is everything. Every single person you invite adds to the catering bill, the rentals, the favors, everything. And suddenly, that big, sprawling list of everyone you've ever met, everyone your parents know, everyone who invited you to their wedding 10 years ago, it just wasn't feasible. We started with a dream list, of course. You know, everyone we could possibly want there. And it was huge, way, way over what we could afford. So then came the brutal part, cutting. We made rules, strict rules, like if we hadn't spoken to them in a year, probably not. If they were a work colleague we weren't actually friends with outside of work, probably not. If it was a +1 for someone we barely knew, maybe not. It felt ruthless. Every name we crossed off felt like a tiny little heartbreak, or at least a pang of guilt. And then there was the family factor. Our families were supportive, mostly of the fact that we were paying for it ourselves. They understood, on an intellectual level, that this meant things would be different. But the guest list? That's where tradition and obligation really rear their heads. Suddenly, there were suggestions. Oh, you have to invite Aunt Carol, even though you haven't seen her since you were 10. Or, what about the Johnsons? Your father plays golf with Mr. Johnson. It was tough because we didn't want to hurt anyone, especially our parents. We knew they loved us and were excited for us, but they also had their own social circles and their own ideas of who should be at a wedding. Explaining that we simply couldn't afford 50 extra people just because they knew them was hard. It felt like we were constantly having to justify our decisions, constantly having to explain that this wasn't about not wanting certain people there, it was purely about finances. There was one particular conversation that sticks out. It was with my mom, and she was asking about inviting some extended family I genuinely didn't know well. I tried to explain our budget constraints, how every person added significant cost. And she just didn't seem to grasp it. Or maybe she did, but she felt the social obligation was more important. She said something like, "But they're family. You can't not invite family." And I remember feeling this knot in my stomach. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about this clash of values. Their value of traditional family obligation versus our value of financial independence and hosting a wedding we could actually afford without going into debt. It put us in such a difficult position. Do you stick to your guns and risk offending people, maybe even your own family? Or do you cave, blow your budget, and start your marriage under financial strain just to satisfy someone else's idea of propriety? It felt like there was no good answer. We spent hours agonizing over the list, adding names back on, taking them off again. We tried to compromise where we could, maybe inviting just the core couple instead of their adult children we'd never met. But even those small things added up. And through all of this, Chris and I had to be a united front. We had to constantly reinforce to each other why we were making these choices. "Remember why we're doing this," we'd say. "We're doing this for us, for our future, not for Aunt Carol or the Johnsons." But it was emotionally draining. You feel like you're constantly saying no, constantly being the bad guy. There was a point where we had the list finalized, or what we thought was finalized, and we were still over budget. We looked at each other, completely exhausted, and realized we had to make even tougher cuts. That meant looking at friends, people we loved, and having to make the incredibly painful decision that we just couldn't accommodate everyone. It felt awful. Like we were ranking our relationships, which was absolutely not the intention. It was purely a logistical and financial necessity. We wrestled with how to even communicate this. Do you tell people? Do you just let them find out through the grapevine? It felt incredibly isolating to be making these decisions that felt so personal and so fraught with potential for hurt feelings. It really made me think about the pressure surrounding weddings, all the expectations, the traditions, the unspoken rules. It felt like we were constantly swimming against the current. And it wasn't just about the guest list. It was the same with venue choices, food options, even things like whether or not to have a fancy cake. Every decision was weighed against the budget and the potential for judgment or disappointment from others. We had to develop a thick skin, I guess. And we had to lean on each other more than ever. Chris was amazing through all of it, always reminding me that our love and our future together were the most important things, and that the wedding was just one day, a celebration of that. But still, the stress was real. The feeling of being judged, of not measuring up to some invisible standard of what a wedding should be, it was hard to shake. We had to make some compromises that felt really significant at the time. For example, we really wanted a specific type of band, but they were way out of our price range. We ended up going with a DJ, which was great, but it felt like a sacrifice at the time. Or not being able to offer a full open bar, just beer and wine. Those kinds of decisions felt like markers of our budget, like flashing signs saying, "We're doing this on the cheap." Even though that wasn't the narrative we wanted. We wanted it to feel intentional and personal, not just budget constrained. It was a constant battle between what we wanted, what we could afford, and what we felt we should do based on external pressures. And honestly, it made me wonder how other people navigate this. Have you ever faced a situation like this, where you had to make really tough, potentially awkward decisions for financial reasons, maybe about a wedding or a big event? What would you have done? Let me know below. Because at the time, it felt like we were completely alone in figuring it out. But through all that stress and those difficult conversations, something else was happening too. We were becoming incredibly resourceful. We were learning to get creative. We were discovering that sometimes the constraints actually force you to come up with ideas that are more personal and more meaningful than just buying the standard package. We started looking at DIY options, researching alternative vendors, thinking outside the box. It wasn't the wedding we initially dreamed of in terms of unlimited possibilities, but it was becoming something unique, something truly reflective of us and our journey together. It was hard, yes, but it was also building something strong, something resilient. And we knew that strength, that resilience was going to be essential for building our marriage too. We were getting closer to the date, and despite the bumps, the excitement was starting to build. We were doing it. We were actually pulling it off. We were doing it. We were actually pulling it off. The date was circled on the calendar, getting closer and closer, and the frantic energy of trying to make it work on our budget was transforming into a kind of determined excitement. We weren't just planning a wedding anymore. We were building something from the ground up, piece by piece, with our own hands and our own ingenuity. We became experts at scouring online marketplaces for gently used decorations. We learned to DIY everything from the invitations, printing them at a local print shop after hours, and assembling them ourselves late into the night, to the centerpieces, which involved a lot of mason jars, twine, and flowers we planned to buy in bulk from a farmer's market the day before. Our apartment turned into a wedding workshop. There were ribbons everywhere, stacks of paper, glue guns, and lists upon lists taped to the fridge. It was messy, chaotic, and honestly, kind of beautiful in its own way. It was ours. We found a venue that wasn't a traditional wedding hall, but a gorgeous old community center with a big open space and a kitchen we could use. It was way more affordable, and it felt more personal, less stuffy. We decided against a full sit-down dinner and opted for a gourmet food truck and a dessert bar made by friends and family who offered to contribute. It wasn't the 5-course plated meal my brother was having, but it felt more like a big, joyful party, which is really what we wanted anyway. We hired a fantastic local DJ who played exactly the kind of music we loved, not just generic wedding hits. Every decision was a negotiation, a compromise, and a creative solution. It tested us for sure, but it also showed us how well we worked together under pressure. We were a team, truly. Meanwhile, the contrast with my brother's wedding planning was becoming almost comical, if it weren't so painful. Every time I talked to my mom, which was less and less frequently now, the conversation would inevitably turn to his wedding. It was all about the expensive photographer she'd booked, the tasting menu for the caterer, the band flown in from out of state. It wasn't just that she was paying. It was the sheer scale of it. The effortless luxury of it all compared to our penny-pinching DIY hustle. She'd talk about the dress shopping trips, the bachelorette party in Vegas, the destination honeymoon they were planning. It sounded like something out of a magazine, a world away from our reality of comparing prices on bulk flowers and debating the cost-effectiveness of different types of paper. I tried, a couple of times, to share details about our plans, about the community center, the food truck, the DIY projects, but the conversations felt flat. There wasn't the same level of interest, the same excitement. It felt like she was just politely listening before steering the conversation back to my brother's big day. There was one particularly awkward call where I mentioned making our own invitations, and she just said, "Oh, that's creative," in a tone that clearly meant cheap. It stung. It felt like everything we were doing, all the effort and love we were pouring into making our day special for us, was being judged and found lacking compared to the standard she was setting for my brother. My dad was mostly silent through all of this. He'd offer a quiet word of encouragement now and then, maybe slip me a little bit of cash for the honeymoon. But he didn't get involved in the planning details, not like he seemed to be with my brother's wedding, where he was apparently helping with the seating chart and picking out the suits. It just reinforced the feeling that this was somehow less important, less real, than my brother's wedding. As the wedding date got closer, the guest list became another sensitive point. We had kept it small from the start, partly for budget reasons, but also because we really wanted it to be an intimate celebration with the people who had genuinely supported us. This meant making some tough choices. We couldn't invite everyone we knew. And as we finalized the list, the absence of certain names felt louder than the presence of others. My mom never offered to contribute, not a single dollar, not even for something small like the cake or the flowers. And frankly, by this point, I wouldn't have accepted it. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the principle, about the feeling of being completely on our own in this, while my brother had everything handed to him. The inequity wasn't just financial, it was emotional. It felt like a clear statement about who and what was valued more. The closer we got, the more we realized that the narrative of our wedding was becoming intrinsically linked to the narrative of my brother's wedding, not in a complimentary way, but in stark opposition. His was the grand, family-funded affair. Ours was the scrappy, self-made celebration. And the question of who would be there, especially from my side of the family, started to weigh heavily. We were building this beautiful personal day, but the thought of my mom being there, comparing everything to my brother's wedding, casting that shadow of judgment or disappointment, felt increasingly difficult to reconcile with the joy we were trying to create. It was our sanctuary, this wedding we were building, and the idea of inviting that kind of tension into it felt wrong. We were getting very, very close now, just weeks away, and we still hadn't sent out the formal invitations. The final decisions had to be made. We were down to the wire, weeks, not months anymore. Every conversation about final details circled back to the guest list. It was the elephant in the room, dressed in a fancy, expensive suit. We had our core group, our friends who had supported us, my partner's family who had welcomed me with open arms and zero expectations about budgets or comparisons. But then there was my side, my dad, my brother, and my mom. My dad was complicated. He and my mom had been divorced for years, and their relationship was non-existent, really. He lived his own life, and while we weren't estranged, we weren't particularly close either. The thought of inviting him felt like an obligation more than a genuine desire to share the day with him. But compared to the dilemma of my mom, it almost felt simple. My brother was a different story. We had a relationship, albeit one strained by the favoritism I'd witnessed my whole life, especially now with the wedding finances. Part of me wanted him there, my only sibling. Part of me knew his presence would inevitably be tied to her, to the knowledge of what he'd received versus what I hadn't. It was messy. But Mom, that was the real hurdle. Every time we talked about sending the invitations, my stomach would clench. How could I invite her, knowing everything? Knowing she'd likely arrive, perhaps with a tight smile, and spend the day mentally tallying costs, comparing our backyard celebration to my brother's ballroom bash? Knowing she'd see the mismatched chairs we'd borrowed, the homemade decorations, the potluck-style contributions from friends, and see not love and community, but lack. It wasn't just about the money she hadn't given us. It was about the implicit message that sent. That his milestone was more important, more worthy of investment than mine. That his happiness in this moment required her significant financial backing, while mine didn't matter in the same way, or perhaps wasn't expected to be as grand, and therefore didn't warrant the same support. It felt like a continuation of a lifetime pattern where he was the golden child, and I was the independent one, I guess, which often felt like a polite way of saying the less favored one. My partner was incredibly supportive through all of this. They saw the pain it caused me, the years of feeling like I was on the outside looking in when it came to my brother and my mom. They understood why the idea of having her there felt like bringing a storm cloud to our sunshine. We talked for hours, weighing the pros and cons, the potential regret later versus the potential for pain on the day itself, the desire for a picture-perfect family moment versus the reality of our fractured family dynamic. Could I have a truly joyful, relaxed wedding day if I was constantly bracing myself for her reaction, her subtle judgments, her comparison? If I was worried about her interacting with my partner's family, who knew nothing of this family history? The answer, we both realized, was probably no. Our wedding was becoming more than just a ceremony and a party. It was a statement. A statement about building something ourselves, relying on each other and the community we had chosen. It was a celebration of our independence, our resilience, and our love, built on a foundation we had laid brick by brick, dollar by dollar. Inviting someone who, intentionally or not, represented the very system of unequal support and perceived lower value felt like a betrayal of what we were trying to create. It felt like inviting someone to rain on our parade, a parade we had worked incredibly hard and sacrificed a lot to build. The principle of it just kept coming back. She had the means. She chose to spend a significant amount on his wedding. She chose not to offer any comparable help, or really any help at all, for mine, even knowing we were doing it all ourselves. It wasn't about needing her money, but the lack of the offer felt like a lack of value placed on me and my life choices. And then to potentially have her there, benefiting from the celebration we had struggled to create, while perhaps still harboring those underlying feelings of judgment or disappointment that it wasn't enough compared to his. It felt fundamentally wrong. Making the final decision was agonizing. It felt harsh. It felt like severing a tie, even though the tie already felt frayed and thin. It felt like admitting that the hope for a different kind of relationship, one where I felt equally valued and supported, was perhaps never going to happen, at least not in the way I had always wished. It was a form of grieving, I think, for the family dynamic I'd always longed for, but never truly had. We sat together, the stack of invitations between us. We went through the list one last time. Friends, my partner's family, a few distant relatives who had always been kind. And then we came to my side. My dad's name stayed. Despite the distance, he was my father. My brother's name stayed too. I wanted to believe, perhaps naively, that he was separate from the financial drama, that our sibling bond was worth preserving, even if strained. But my mom's name? It wasn't added. We looked at each other, a silent, heavy understanding passing between us. It was the hardest decision, but it felt like the only one that allowed us to protect the peace and joy of our day, the day we had built from the ground up, together. Sealing those envelopes felt like sealing a chapter. It felt final. There was a strange mix of relief and sadness. Relief that the agonizing decision was made, that we had prioritized our peace and the sanctity of our wedding day. Sadness for the family I didn't have, the mother-daughter relationship that was defined more by what was withheld than what was given. The invitations went into the mailbox, a bright red flag in a sea of blue, carrying our hopes and dreams, and also the quiet, unspoken message of who would and wouldn't be sharing that day with us. The silence that followed felt deafening. It was only a matter of time before she found out. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that hummed with anticipation, like waiting for a storm you knew was coming, but didn't know when it would hit or how bad it would be. Every time my phone rang, my stomach would clench. Was it her? Had she heard? Who would tell her? Would she find out herself somehow? We had sent the invitations out, a physical manifestation of our carefully constructed guest list, and now it was just a waiting game. My husband kept telling me to breathe, that it was done, we had made our choice, and we needed to focus on the wedding, on us. He was right, of course, but the anxiety was a constant, low-grade fever. We tried to throw ourselves into the final wedding details. Cake tasting, finalizing the playlist with the DJ, arranging the flowers. Every happy task felt slightly overshadowed by the unspoken tension. It was like we were building this beautiful, joyful fortress, knowing there was an attack imminent on the horizon. We didn't talk about her much in those weeks, not directly. It was the elephant in the room, a large, silent, emotionally charged elephant. My father knew, of course, because he was invited, and his name was on the invitation. His response had been quiet, understanding. He didn't try to mediate, didn't try to change my mind. He just said he was proud of me for building the life I wanted and that he looked forward to celebrating with us. That meant the world. It validated the impossible choice we'd made. The call came about 3 weeks after the invitations went out. It wasn't her directly. It was my aunt, her sister. My aunt was invited, and apparently she had casually mentioned our upcoming wedding to my mother. My mother, of course, hadn't said anything about receiving an invitation. My aunt, confused, asked if she had gotten hers yet, and that's how the bomb dropped. My aunt, bless her heart, called me sounding flustered and upset. She said my mother was livid and inconsolable. My aunt didn't understand what was happening, just that my mother was incredibly angry that she hadn't received an invitation. I had to explain it to my aunt, the whole story, the years of financial disparities, the $15K, the lack of support for my wedding, the feeling that I was less important, less worthy of her investment. My aunt listened, her initial confusion turning into quiet understanding. She didn't say I was wrong. She just sighed and said, "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry you're dealing with this. She's really something else sometimes." The call from my mother came an hour later. My hands were shaking when I saw her name on the caller ID. I took a deep breath and answered it. Her voice was sharp, cutting, laced with a fury I hadn't heard directed at me in years. "What is this I hear?" she demanded, not even a hello. "Your Aunt Carol tells me you're getting married and I didn't get an invitation? What kind of stunt is this?" I tried to stay calm, to explain. "Mom, we sent out the invitations a few weeks ago. Your name wasn't on it." "My name wasn't on it?" she shrieked. "Why? Why wasn't my name on my own daughter's wedding invitation? Are you trying to humiliate me? Are you trying to punish me?" "It's not about humiliating you, Mom," I said, my voice trembling slightly, despite my best efforts. "It's about everything that's happened. It's about how you've treated me compared to brother. It's about the fact that you paid $15,000 for his wedding and haven't offered a single dollar, a single bit of help, for mine. It feels like you don't value me, Mom. It feels like I'm not worth the same to you." Her response was immediate and defensive. "Oh, here we go. Always about the money. Is that all you care about? Money? You're so ungrateful. After everything I've done for you." "Everything you've done for me?" I repeated, the years of hurt bubbling to the surface. "Like what, Mom? Like making me feel like I was always second best? Like celebrating brother's milestones with fanfare and barely acknowledging mine? Like paying for his entire lavish wedding and leaving me to figure out how to pay for mine alone?" "That was different," she insisted, her voice rising. "He needed the help. You're doing fine. You and husband, you have good jobs. You can afford your own wedding." "That's not the point, Mom." I finally raised my voice. "The point is the principle. It's the blatant inequality. It's about feeling like your love and support are conditional, based on who you decide is more deserving at any given moment. And frankly, after everything, I didn't feel like I could have a peaceful, happy wedding day with you there, knowing how you've made me feel, knowing the clear favoritism." The line was silent for a moment, a heavy, charged silence. Then her voice dropped, cold and hard. "Fine, fine, if that's how you feel. If you want to cut me out of your life, go ahead. Don't expect me to come crawling back. Don't expect me to be there for you when things get tough. You've made your choice. You've chosen to abandon your own mother." "I haven't abandoned you, Mom," I said, tears welling up now. "I've just set a boundary. I've chosen to protect my peace and my relationship with husband on our wedding day. This isn't about abandoning you. It's about finally standing up for myself." "Standing up for yourself? By excluding your mother from your wedding?" she scoffed. "That's not standing up for yourself. That's cruel. That's spiteful. You are just like your grandmother, you know that? Cold and unforgiving." The comparison stung, but I refused to engage with the personal attacks. "Mom, this conversation isn't productive. We've made our decision. We wish things were different, but they're not. We're moving forward with our plans." "Moving forward without your mother," she stated flatly. Got it. Don't call me again. Don't expect to hear from me." And with that, she hung up. The dial tone buzzed in my ear, a stark, final sound. I stood there for a long moment, the phone still pressed to my ear, tears streaming down my face. It was over. The confrontation I had dreaded had happened, and it was exactly as painful as I had feared, maybe worse. But beneath the pain, there was a strange sense of release. The waiting was over. The storm had hit, and while it had left destruction in its wake, the air felt clearer, sharper. I had stood my ground. I hadn't caved. I had prioritized my well-being and the sanctity of the day I was building with my husband. It was a hollow victory, perhaps, because it came at the cost of a relationship that, despite everything, I had always hoped could be different. But it was a necessary one. The wedding was just a few weeks away now. The path ahead was clear, albeit marked by the emotional wreckage of that phone call. We had a wedding to finish planning, a future to step into, a new family to build, one based on mutual respect and equal footing. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a fragile sense of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could have the day we deserved, free from the shadow of past hurts. The final countdown had begun. The weeks that followed that phone call were a blur, a painful, necessary blur. It was like ripping off a Band-Aid, the initial sharp sting followed by a dull ache. The air was clear, like I said, but it was also thin. There was no more pretending, no more hoping for a last-minute miracle or a sudden change of heart. The decision was made, the boundary was drawn, and the consequences were immediate and stark. Silence. Complete and utter silence from my mother, from my brother, from anyone on that side of the family who might have felt caught in the middle. It was the silence of a door slamming shut, not just closed, but bolted from the inside. And honestly, it hurt. It hurt more than I wanted to admit, even to myself. For all the frustration, the anger, the feeling of being unseen and undervalued, there was still that little girl inside who just wanted her mom to be proud, to be happy for her, to be there. But that wasn't going to happen. The reality of it settled in during those final weeks, heavy and undeniable. But life doesn't stop for heartbreak, does it? Especially not when you're planning a wedding you've paid for yourselves. There was still so much to do. Finalizing vendors, confirming RSVPs, the few we had sent out to friends and my husband's family, arranging the decorations, writing our vows. It was a whirlwind of logistics, and in a way, that was a blessing. It forced me to focus on the tangible, the practical, the beautiful future we were building, rather than dwelling on the past or the pain of the present. My fiancé was my rock through all of it. He never wavered. He held my hand when I cried after that call. He listened patiently when I vented. And he reminded me, constantly, why we were doing this. Why we were doing this together. He saw the stress, the underlying sadness, but he also saw the determination. He saw that this wasn't just about a wedding. It was about starting our life on our own terms, independent and strong. His support meant everything. It was proof that I had chosen the right partner, someone who truly understood me and stood by me, even when things were incredibly difficult. His family was amazing too. They welcomed me with open arms and zero judgment. They knew some of the story, enough to understand the situation without getting into the messy details. They offered help with decorations, with setting up, with anything we needed. Their warmth and acceptance were a balm to my soul. It felt like I was finally gaining a family, a real one, built on mutual respect and love, not obligation or conditional approval. As the wedding day drew closer, the mix of emotions was intense. There was genuine excitement, a bubbling anticipation for the moment we would finally be married, surrounded by the people who chose to be there, who celebrated us. There was pride, too, in what we had accomplished together, planning and funding this entire event ourselves. It was a testament to our partnership, our ability to tackle challenges head-on and build something beautiful from the ground up. But beneath all that, there was still a thread of melancholy. It felt strange, planning such a significant life event, knowing a huge piece of my history, my own mother, wouldn't be there. There were moments when the what-ifs crept in, the tiny whispers of doubt or sadness. What if she had just been different? What if she had seen me, really seen me, for who I was and what I needed? What if she had treated me with the same generosity, the same enthusiasm she had shown my brother? But those thoughts were unproductive, and I learned to gently push them away. I had to, for my own sanity and for the sanctity of the day we were creating. We decided to keep the wedding small and intimate. It felt right. No grand gestures, no elaborate displays designed to impress. Just the people who loved us and whom we loved back. It was held outdoors, in a place that felt natural and peaceful. Every detail, from the simple flowers we arranged ourselves to the music playlist we curated, felt personal and meaningful. There was a quiet dignity to it, a sense of purpose that went beyond just throwing a party. This was about two people making a commitment, surrounded by their chosen community. The last few days before the wedding were a flurry of activity. Picking up the rings, packing the final boxes, getting everything ready at the venue. Sleep was scarce, fueled by nervous energy and anticipation. There was a moment, maybe 2 days before, when I paused amidst the chaos and just looked around. At my fiancé, patiently tying ribbons on favors. At my future sister-in-law, helping set up chairs. At the space we had transformed with our own hands and the help of our friends. And it hit me. This was ours. Every single bit of it. The effort, the love, the cost, the joy, the pain that had led us here. It was all woven into the fabric of this day. There was no last-minute call from my mother. No desperate plea. No change of heart. Not even a text message. Just the silence. And as the hours ticked down to the wedding day, that silence transformed. It wasn't just an absence anymore. It became a presence of its own, a quiet confirmation that I had made the right, albeit difficult, choice. It was a stark reminder of the boundaries I had set and the price of enforcing them. But it was also a validation of my worth, my needs, and my right to build a life free from the patterns of the past. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright. There was a stillness before the day truly began, a moment to breathe and just be. Getting ready with my closest friends felt surreal. Laughter mixed with happy tears, the scent of hairspray and flowers filling the air. As I looked in the mirror, dressed in the simple, beautiful dress I had chosen and paid for myself, I felt a profound sense of peace. There were no obligations weighing me down, no expectations I had to live up to, no performance to give. This day wasn't for anyone else. It was for me, for my husband, and for the future we were about to step into together. The journey to this moment had been long and challenging, marked by difficult decisions and emotional costs. But standing there, ready to walk down the aisle, I knew, with absolute certainty, that I had done what I needed to do. The day had finally arrived. Walking down that aisle felt like stepping into a different dimension. All the noise, all the worry, all the history just faded away. It was just me, the music, and the man waiting for me at the end. Every step was a choice, a deliberate movement away from the past and towards a future I was actively creating. There were no ghosts haunting the edges of the room, no strained smiles from people I felt obligated to. It was exactly what a wedding should be. A celebration of love, pure and simple, shared with the people who genuinely supported us. My husband's eyes were full of so much love, so much understanding. In that moment, I knew every single struggle, every tear, every difficult conversation had been worth it. The ceremony was short, sweet, and deeply meaningful. We wrote our own vows, promising not just to love each other, but to honor the journey that brought us together and to build a life based on mutual respect, honesty, and unwavering support. Looking out at the faces of our friends and family, the ones who had stood by me, the ones who had seen me at my lowest and highest, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. It wasn't about the size of the guest list or the extravagance of the details. It was about the quality of the connections, the genuine love in the room. That's something you can't buy, can't force, and can't fake. The reception was exactly what I had dreamed of, low-key and joyful. Great food, good music, lots of laughter, and dancing until our feet hurt. There were no dramatic speeches, no awkward encounters. It was just pure, unadulterated happiness. For the first time in a long time, maybe ever, I felt completely present, completely free. I wasn't worried about saying the wrong thing, or disappointing someone, or living up to some impossible standard. I was just me, celebrating my love with my chosen family. As the night wound down, my husband and I stole a few moments alone, just watching everyone from a distance. He squeezed my hand and said, "We did it." And we had. We had built this together, against the odds sometimes. We had created a space where we could just be ourselves, where our love was the foundation, not an afterthought or a bargaining chip. Leaving the reception, driving away into our new life together, I looked back at the lights of the venue fading behind us. It wasn't just the end of a wedding day. It felt like the closing of a really long, really challenging chapter. The journey to get here was messy. It involved setting boundaries that felt brutal at the time, making choices that hurt people I once thought were essential to my life, and walking away from situations that were deeply ingrained. There were days I felt lost, days I questioned everything, days I wondered if the peace I was searching for even existed. But slowly, painstakingly, I learned that my worth wasn't tied to anyone else's approval or expectations. I learned that saying no to what hurt me was saying yes to myself. I learned that building a strong, authentic life meant dismantling the fragile, inauthentic one I had inherited. It was like tearing down a house that was built on shaky ground, piece by piece, even when it felt terrifyingly exposed, so that I could build a new one brick at a time, on solid rock. The cost of that demolition was high, emotionally. There were relationships lost, misunderstandings that were never resolved, and the lingering ache of what could have been if things had been different. But the cost of not doing it would have been even higher. It would have been my own happiness, my own peace, my own sense of self. That was a price I was no longer willing to pay. Standing here now, married, surrounded by the life we're building, I can honestly say I have no regrets about the path I took. It was the only way I could have arrived at this place, a place of genuine joy and freedom. It makes you think about those pivotal moments in your own life, doesn't it? The times you had to make a hard choice to protect yourself or build something new. If you faced a similar situation where you had to choose yourself and walk a difficult path, what was the biggest lesson you learned from that experience? Let me know in the comments. The future isn't some abstract concept anymore. It's here, unfolding day by day. It's quiet mornings with coffee together, planning our next adventure, supporting each other through the ups and downs of everyday life. It's building traditions, creating memories, and simply enjoying the simple, profound beauty of a life built on love and respect. I used to think happiness was something you found, something that happened to you. Now I know it's something you build, deliberately, with intention, every single day. It requires courage, resilience, and a fierce commitment to honoring your own truth. This isn't the end of the story, of course. It's just the end of this particular chapter, the one about breaking free and finding my way. Life will keep happening, with all its twists and turns. But now I face it standing on my own 2 feet, with a strong partner by my side, and a clear sense of who I am and what truly matters. And that is everything.